This set of slides is in preparation for the case, why are we losing all our good people? We want to start this by thinking about strategic human resource management. And how do managers manage the most important resource, which are human beings? So human resource management, at the highest level is basically intended to attract, develop, and retain an effective workforce. In this case, you're dealing with a design company, and so the knowledge and creativity of the people within that company is how this particular company competes, and that's what we call human capital. So it's the productive potential of the employees within the organization, and this is how they actually competitively engage with the marketplace. In addition to that, there's social capital, and that's the potential of strong, trusting, and cooperative relationships within the organization. So from the case, you already know that there is some issue with retention of productive employees, good employees, as well as social capital. So there is some discussion about things that happen within the lunchroom. And you're seeing that there is, some potential unrest going on, unrest that could undermine, the strong trusting and cooperative relationships in the organization. Now, one thing that you need to understand and consider is that the human resource strategy needs to be congruent with the overall company strategy. It has to achieve goals that then allow the company to do what it wants to do in the particular marketplace. So one thing to think about in this case is how well is the human strategy aligned with the overall company strategy. And human resource strategy, again, is what is attracting and retaining people to the organization? What are people looking for in this organization? And then is that aligned with the overall company strategy of how it's now competing in the marketplace? How has that changed over time, and what's happening there? Strategic human resource planning needs to understand the current employees' needs and predict future employees' needs. Okay, so in this particular case, you're going to have current employees and understand what's happening there, but how is that changing in the future? Is this just a blip that they need to, yes, be concerned about, but not really put a lot of attention and resources into, or is this actually a trend? And if it's a trend, then it's going to worsen in the future, and that's going to affect, the meeting of needs for this company in terms of employees in the future. The steps in the process for strategic human resource planning is to first plan out what those needs are, then recruit and select, orient, train, and develop, and perform appraisals. We're going to cover these briefly, but one thing I think you should do in this case is to think about each of the managers that are in this story, and think about how well they perform each one of these steps. Now, not all of these steps are necessarily explained in enough detail, but a few of them are. But this should help you think through things that are happening within the case, and potential interventions that maybe you should be taking in the future. Okay, so let's start off with planning human resource needs and how you predict. You want to think about a good understanding what the personnel of the organization need. What are these people that are attracted to this organization? What's important to them? What do they like to do with their career? What gets them up in the morning and gets them to drive into work and be all energized, and things such as that. So you want to think about the kind of culture and the kind of person that this is attracting, and how are we able to meet that with the organization. Then like these sources of personnel, both internal as well as external. The planning process looks something like this. So this should be somewhat familiar from strategic planning, in that we start off by looking at the environment and scanning the environment to understand what's happening now, plus what may be going on in the particular future. And again, your organizational objectives and policies for your human resource plan have to be able to meet the organizational objectives and policies of your higher level overall strategy for the organization. When you're looking at the environment, you're going to look at, okay, what are our current needs, right, as well as what are our future needs, right? And then what's the supply look like now and then potentially in the future. Supply of competent and qualified employees doesn't always stay the same. So you may be dealing with either a supply or shortage of employees, depending on the situations. Once you have an understanding of that, then you want to do your HR programming, so that to make sure that your current and future needs are met in some way, shape, or form. Again, how are you going to attract the right people and then be able to retain them? Once you have your program in place, then you can begin to implement that program, and then you're going to measure, control, and evaluate the program so that you can make changes as you go along, so that hopefully you have a surplus rather than a shortage of human resources. It's always be good to be in a surplus. That's fine, because it puts you in, as a company, in a better negotiation position, such that to hire qualified employees, it won't cost you quite as much as it would as if you're trying to attract them and there's very few in the market. You're going to have to pay a much higher price. Right, recruiting and selection. How do managers choose the best person for a job? Well, there's two types of recruitment: internal and external. All right, and so you see from this case that there is some turnover. And so now there's a choice to make about how you're going to recruit people to fill these positions. So what are the pros and cons of each type of recruitment? And again, how does this fit into the overall culture and strategy within the organization? There's an issue with this in terms of filling in a position internally versus external. Within this particular case, and you need to think through what may be the best thing to do. And again, how does this impact later steps in the HR process? So depending on what they try to do within the organization in terms of recruitment, that can affect later steps in this process. In terms of orient, train, and develop, orientation first is trying to get people to be newcomers to fit smoothly into the job. This is the first beginning way that managers help new hires become successful, is that you orient them on what the job routine is, what the mission and operations of the organization are, what are the work rules and benefits, and then as well as the organization's culture. The quicker that an employee begins to understand the culture, then the quicker they're able to get comfortable with it and find a good role within the particular culture and their job. That's always a big plus in terms of helping people become successful up front, and the quicker you're successful, the more happy you'll be and likely that you'll be able to retain that particular employee. There's not a lot about implementation straight up into this particular case, but there should be a lot about training and development in terms of thinking through what's happening in this particular organization. In the training, there's educating technical and operational employees in how to do their current jobs better. So this is more of a vertical type of thing in terms of getting the needed technical skills for people in order to do their job or expand what they can do in their particular job. Development is different though. It's educating professionals and managers in the skills they need to do their jobs in the future, but it's intended to get people in a horizontal movement within the organization so that they have upward mobility and can get higher positions within the organization. 5 steps in either, basically both of these processes to assess, is there training needed? Who has potential to be able to do this, or who needs extra training in order to advance or do their job? And then what kind of training and development is needed? Which methods should be used in terms of training or development? And then finally you would implement that and then evaluate how effective it was and then go back and make changes as necessary. A big part of training and development is actually a process called coaching. Coaching, if you remember the Pike Place fish video, was a large part of the reason why that organization became a high-performance team and achieved the results that it did. And so coaching is basically an interactive process by which a person helps another to solve a problem, develop employee capabilities through the use of teaching and feedback. If you remember from that case, the Pike Place one that was, employees coached when they saw that there was a need to do coaching. So there was a real intent on trying to help people become better and to fulfill themselves as best they could within their particular jobs. In order to perform coaching, there are certain steps, and these are preparation, discussion, active coaching, and follow-up. Again, training is going to be a little more aligned with the technical skills, but it is also part of development as well, so that's why we're covering it first. In terms of preparation, basically what a person does is that they monitor employee behaviors, interactions, and outputs, and then they observe and understand an employee's strengths and weaknesses. So part of that is going to be, okay, who needs it and who could use it, and who's ready for coaching. So you're going to determine that through the need and the willingness or the ability to be able to take training at this particular time, or coaching, you'll be able to understand who can benefit best from this. Right? Discussion then is expressing. The coach will express the observation with the intent, of helping the employee grow and improve. A large part of discussion is actually active listening, not being judgmental, but just to gather additional information about what's happening with that person, and what they need to do in order to get their job better. So you need to get a lot of, you did your observation, your preparation, but the discussion is gaining additional information and insight from that person, which you're not going to get unless you actually have active listening within the discussion. Again, this is one, I said, getting an understanding of why they're struggling, but also maybe getting their perception, which is very important to understand so that you can help, shape that perception in an appropriate way. And then, once you've agreed that there's actually some coaching that can take place, then you should actually you should set some goals between both of the coach and the coachee before moving on to the active coaching, so you fully understand what's intended to happen as a part of this process. Right? And then active coaching, and that's basically scheduling one-on-one sessions, focusing on the skills and behaviors, establishing a specific and reasonable timeline for accomplishing the goals, and then you just do the methods of the training that need to be done, and then provide informal feedback all along the way. And then obviously a big part of motivation is recognizing any type of improvements that are made through this process. And lastly, there's the follow-up that you want to, training. Obviously, there has to be practice and etc. afterwards. So you want to check on additional goal progress or additional things that need to be done for that person to improve, and then provide further assistance as needed. Okay. Now, mentoring is a little bit different. This aligns much more with the development section. And mentoring is the offering of advice, information, and guidance by a person with useful experience, skills, and expertise for an employee's personal and professional development. Now, again, mentoring is something very much different. It's intended for career growth, okay, not just a job, for a career. And you're intended for the person to be able to gain higher level positions within the organization. Notice that it says personal and professional growth. Therefore, for mentoring to really be effective, there has to be a personal relationship between the two people. That's why a lot of canned or formal types of mentoring programs don't particularly work all that well. There can be a few that do provide some gains, but most of the time people just kind of go through the motions and get it done and finish with it, simply because there isn't really a personal relationship on the level that needs to be done in order to mentor a particular person. A mentor who is someone who is special in your life, quite frankly, because it's their help that has helped you develop and grow not only professionally but as a person, and that provides the leadership skill sets for you to be effective at higher level positions. Most people who have moved up in organizations, especially larger ones, have had very good mentors, and so they seek out an appropriate mentor that can provide the type of development that is needed for them to be successful later on. So this is no little thing. This is very important to high-level career success. Okay, so functions of mentoring, there are two sides of this. There are career functions, which are sponsorship, coaching, protection, challenge, and then exposure and visibility. Let's talk about sponsor, what a mentor does for a person in terms of career, and that sponsorship, that they open doors that would otherwise be closed. So they get them to get opportunities within the organization. They'll provide some coaching, with, again, teaching and providing feedback for the person. Protection. The mentor supports the protege and acts as a buffer. Sometimes, when you need to move up, the higher you move, the more risky it is. The riskier position, because a lot of people are shooting for those positions, but also you're dealing with more uncertainty as you move up in an organization. The decisions you make have more uncertainty and risk associated with them. Therefore, you're going to need someone that provides you protection when things sometimes don't go as well as they should, and nobody bats 1,000, right? So that can be an important part here. The challenge in terms of the sponsorship and opening up opportunities, you want to be able to show that the person can meet, higher level challenges. So they'll be able to sponsor you and get you into those types of things. And so that will give you some way to show that you can stretch your capabilities, but also can meet challenges that prove your worth to the organization. And then the same thing, through sponsorship is opening up those opportunities that give you exposure and visibility. You don't want just challenge. You also want projects that are highly visible and important to the organization. And so they're able to get you into those assignments so that, people who are making these types of decisions are able to see how well you do and value that. The psychosocial functions of mentorship are basically, that's more on the personal development, and that's role modeling, counseling, acceptance and confirmation, and friendship. Again, that's why it needs to be more of a personal relationship. Role modeling is basically demonstrating the kinds of behaviors, attitudes and values that lead to success within the organization, or basically maybe within a particular role in an industry. Counseling, a mentor will help the protege deal with difficult professional dilemmas. It could be anything from, ethical dilemmas to job choices and etc. Acceptance and confirmation. The mentor will support the protege, and have, very healthy respect between the mentor and the mentee. And this provides, again, some additional confidence and etc. to the mentee. And then friendship, it basically is a personal caring that goes beyond just business requirements for that person, as a whole. And as human beings, those are some of the most effective relationships that we have. Okay, so the benefits of coaching and mentoring for an organization are basically development of human assets. You get more competent employees and more promotable employees. There's a lot of transfer of knowledge that happens. So that's important because that creates retention of knowledge. If key people do leave, especially in knowledge industries or something like you're dealing with a design firm, there are people that can walk out the door knowing things that other people do not. But if there is the type of culture that fosters mentoring type of relationships, that knowledge will actually get transferred to other people. Therefore, it can actually be retained within the organization. It does improve culture because of the type of relationships that coaching and mentoring foster. It creates a more positive climate, and that's the kind of relationships that you need in this kind of creative work. And then personnel retention, because of the improved the competency, promotability of employees, which shows upward mobility and opportunity, and the improved culture. Well, that leads to better retention. People are happier and want to stay. And then organizational results are obviously improved because of that. So one thing you might want to think about this organization is what is happening, what's the current state and it's important to assess certain decisions in terms of whether they're appropriate decisions given what has happened in terms of this kind of coaching and mentoring in the organization, and to what extent that has actually occurred. Performance appraisals. There's really not too much about performance appraisals in this, except for when you might think about the the exit interview, which is somewhat of not really in a performance appraisal, but you're actually trying to get a lot of information from the employee, like you would in a performance appraisal, about their job, instead of saying, well, why, what are your goals and what you're trying to accomplish on the job, and how can we help you be better? What are the things you're struggling with? You're asking, okay, why, what are your goals now, and why are you leaving in terms of your career goals? So it's important to ascertain what's really happening, because just like in a performance appraisal, if you can't understand why a person is struggling, you can't help them. And if you can't understand why a person is leaving, you can't fix the problem. So a performance appraisal is assessing employees' performance and providing him or her with feedback. And again, it provides employees with an understanding of how they're doing relative to objectives and helps with development training. But with an exit interview, there's a different purpose to this particular thing, but just as important to gain this type of information. Two types of appraisals are objective, based on facts, and then subjective when you're looking at the traits and behaviors of the particular person. Again, this part of it, you don't really have to worry too much about the case, but it is a part of the human resource process, and I didn't want to skip it in the slides. Okay. Something else to consider for this is, what about compensation and benefits? Compensation basically has three parts: wages or salaries, which is the basic wage or salary, incentives, and then as well as benefits. What are the non-monetary forms of compensation that a particular company offers? Again, this is part of the overall HR strategy, and again, what are people looking for, and what is the strategy of the particular organization? And does this all fit together? Can you attract and retain people with this HR strategy and with the overall strategy of the organization? Okay, I think we need to go back and review some slides that we've already actually looked at in a prior case. And this is dealing with perception and attribution. So now that we've covered HR management, again, let's think about what's happening in this organization. And it's important to understand the perceptions of the people, and that's how they are interpreting their environment. Okay, and that's what the social information processing model is all about. More importantly, we have to look at attributional bias, and that's a cognitive bias that determines, what we think is responsible for an event or action. Remember earlier in this video, I said, is this a blip or is it a trend? And how the managers attribute causes to what's happening is going to be key to their perception of whether this is a blip or a trend. But what you do in terms of the interventions, whether it's a blip or trend, is going to be very different, and that is going to determine how successfully you deal with this dilemma that they are faced with. Okay. Attributional biases. There's a lot of actor-observer differences. So again, people who observe things don't fully understand. That's why when coaching, you're going to go do some active listening outside of your observation so that you can get a better perspective, because you don't have, even from just observing, you don't have everything, because there's asymmetries in availability of information. You learned that somewhat in the Mount Everest simulation that we did about asymmetries and how that can cause bad decisions. So we have that kind of thing with the attributional bias. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. So, for example, behavior is often easier to remember than the setting in which the person found themselves. it's important to understand behavior within the context, within the setting that's happening. And how a person feels is more available to themselves. They often hide that than they do to someone else. And you probably saw some of that within the exit interviews. And that's a big issue, because if you don't get that information, you're going to have a hard time fixing the problem. And so our attributional judgments are distorted along these particular lines. Now let's get back to the causal attributions, which we dealt with before. And those are the suspected or inferred causes of behavior. Now let's go back to Kelly's model attribution. You have internal factors, personal characteristics that cause behavior. Okay, is it due to just the individuals themselves and the goals that they have, or what's happening in their personal life? Or is it due to external factors? Is it simply something in the environment that's causing turnover to particularly happen in here, and it's something that you don't have as much influence over in terms of interventions you would take? Okay, or is it a combination of both of these things? And to what extent is it a combination of both of these things? To think through effective interventions, you will have to know how strong the internal factors are and how strong the external factors are. Okay. Again, we have the three dimensions of behavior. That's consensus. Again, the people are the people's behavior within this context. Are they all very similar now? Is there high consensus to this? And that may help you think through whether this is really a blip or a trend. How distinctive is this? The people that are leaving, how is their task performance as compared to others? Is it highly distinctive, and is it consistency? Again, this is the time thing. This is going to be also very important understanding if this is going to be a trend or a blip. Here's just a review again of what each would look like on a chart to get you a better understanding of consensus, distinctiveness, consistency, and how you assess that. And then what we want to do is reduce our fundamental attribution bias by ignoring environmental factors that affect behavior. And then the self-serving biases is taking more personal responsibility for success. And when things fail, hey, it's never my fault, it's not the company's fault. Is that happening in this particular situation? And what is the attribution that is being given within this case? And do you think that that is accurate? So in terms of the case analysis, to wrap up, I want you to think about how well human resource strategic management is being planned and executed. Okay, where do you see incongruencies? Between the HR strategic plan and the overall company strategy. What steps are not being performed well in terms of the HR strategic process? Again, note that some steps may not be as well described in the case, such as performance evaluations, but you can mention these and tie them into strategy and process, but don't dwell on them too much. Okay, but other steps that are well described, you should really try to dig down into those, including type of exit strategy or exit interviews. Think about what perceptions people hold and why, what attitudes, biases, and etc. are present. Does the structure and the culture of the organization contribute to these problems in any way? Again, we always want to think about the context within which is happening, and to what extent do you have any information that points to any of that? And then what other factors lead to the perceptions, behaviors evident in the case, which includes, attributional bias. And then lastly, obviously, I'm going to ask you how the situation could be improved. What would you do to actually change it? So that gives you a lot to think about for this particular case. It's a short case, but it's filled with all kinds of stuff. So you should be plenty busy thinking about it. And I hope that these slides help, and good luck on the case.